Great work. Thank you very much for coming and sharing that. I remember the first time I helped fund an airplane or a helicopter, I think, that took the temperature of a stream as it flew along the Mackenzie. It was FLIR imagery. So cool. Where all the hot springs are. That's a good thing to know. Not just for the fish. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit and bring up a panel. And again, it's a little bit more of a manager's sort of a perspective on things. James Dickinson, who is a fire ecologist with the Bureau of Land Management, is going to be facilitating a great panel for us, talking about, I believe, a paradigm shift. So how do we do that shift? What is that shift? Where have we been? Where are we going? I think those are the sorts of things they're going to explore. So James is going, yeah, I think you kind of got it, Cheryl. So James, come on up and introduce your group all at once. Is that what your plan is? Yep. Okay, I'll turn it over to James. Help me welcome him to the stage.
So good morning. I'm, as Cheryl mentioned, James Dickinson, state fire ecologist for Oregon, Washington, BLM. We're going to go into a better introduction for each of the panel members, but I want to start by thanking Cheryl Friesen, Angie Elam, Alex Rosen, who's my co-facilitator for the panel discussion, Andrew, Rebecca, Dustin, and Barb on the end down here. They've all gone out of their way to come participate in today's workshop. They've traveled, with the exception of Andrew and Dustin, they've traveled quite a distance to get here. And it speaks a lot to where this topic has developed and where it's going, and the natural inclination or the resonation that every time it comes up that it's having with my fellow land managers. This is definitely a different topic for all of us, and I think it's, I actually have to follow a script. When I typed in this title into my favorite essay writer with artificial intelligence, it popped out such an awesome product that I just plopped it right into my presentation and moved forward with it. But those of you who know me, it's really easy for me to get spooled up and get off topic, so I really wanted to set this up well for folks and go from there. So one of the reasons we thought this was important to present here in this particular workshop is that as a community of resource specialists, land managers, researchers, we have an obligation to constantly seek to do better, to get our lands, our ecosystems into perpetuity, right? This is our world, this is our earth, our planet. And so there's a core obligation for all of us to live up to that. So, I'll go ahead and start into this. Today's presentation is part of an ongoing number of as yet informal discussions about where land management agencies need to go to better adapt to our contemporary world. This topic has grown from a slow accumulation of comments into occasional conversations and now frequent conversations. For me, the frequency of the offhand remarks gave way to willfully searching for opportunities to talk with colleagues after I presented to FEMA about the organizational impacts of climate change. In that presentation, one of the key messages that I arrived at was that any emergency response agency needs to continue promoting the mitigation of risk, but importantly, that mitigation to natural disasters has to happen throughout the management cycle, not just in the mitigation phase, but also during the disaster response and subsequent recovery phases. The same is true for land management agencies. Standing in a room with fire researchers, social researchers, and managers, I don't think I'm alone when I make the assertion that it's time for a paradigm shift within land management. For the sake of time, you will hear me use fairly broad language to introduce this topic. The specifics vary by organization, personnel, social, political environment, and ecosystem. But I believe the topic is ripe for discussion, and I believe it's apropos to nearly all land management agencies. I'll reference three generic phases of management. It would help if I move forward here. Apologize. I'll reference three generic phases of management. Green management, which is the day-to-day risk mitigation and ecosystem services work that we do. and then wildfire management and post-fire management. You can't speak at a fire conference if you don't have a triangle in your presentation, so I made sure to include a really cool snazzy diagram that's got this here. I'll go into a little bit more detail on this, but at each of the 3 points of the triangle is one of the management phases. Hopefully you guys can see that in the back. Green management, wildfire management, post-fire management. And then within that triangle is just this broader body of ecology that we in this room collectively develop and understand and interpret. And then outside of that triangle is labeled socioeconomics, but really that's the social envelope, the social license that we work through. In the current paradigm, we are focused on what, where, and how to treat in specific places so that we can protect resources in adjacent locations. Our protection paradigm requires that we utilize those treated areas to contain, control, and extinguish fires in order to protect the adjacent valuable resources that we're already invested in. Because rarely does our management alter the vulnerability to a hazard, merely the exposure. After we extinguish fires, we often are immediately focused on restoring that fire footprint to what it was before, after making it safe for ourselves and the public. Currently, at each decision-making phase, we are looking at the next phase in order. Apologize. Currently, we're looking at each phase, we're looking at the next phase in order. Green management is thinking about fire issues. Fire management is oriented towards first-order resource damage, and post-fire is thinking about immediate stabilization and getting personnel shifted back to the green management. The diagram on the left is intended to describe how the management phases align with one another and what I'll call this ecological license and the socioeconomic license. The current paradigm biases management focus with only some overlap of the ecological license, but a preponderance is within the social license realm. While each management phase is intended or desires to capture the ecology, it is often restricted by a variety of factors. In addition, all phases are narrowly oriented towards the next management phase. In effect, it runs quite sequentially, something like what is on the right here. The focus on green management makes some sense. It's what we do every day, and by and large, we've done for decades. But it doesn't make complete sense. In light of climate change, increasing fire frequency and size, altered ecosystems, and urban expansion, not to mention the cost to carry out any work and the difficulty of funding that work, in addition, the amount of impact, both positive and negative from fires, greatly exceeds our capacity to restore landscape function through this traditional paradigm with a green management emphasis. What can we do differently? What is needed is a realignment of the perspectives from the next decision in the sequence. Instead, each phase of management needs to analyze and assess what is appropriate for both of the other phases of management. This shifts the questions asked to be more holistic. Where can I protect things, and where can I modify fire behavior to have better outcomes for my landscape? Where do I need to focus on protection of life and property, and where can I focus on having better post-fire outcomes and benefit for natural resources, all while reducing a risk to my fire personnel? What can I do before a fire to reduce classic post-fire risk to infrastructure, health, and well-being, increase landscape functionality, and promote better fire management options in this landscape? Interestingly, you can see in this diagram that each phase of management actually promotes and leverages the ecological and socioeconomic licenses of the other management phases. It becomes a much more holistic management model, one where the success of an action is determined by the relationship of the 2 other management phases. Of interest to the folks organizing and attending this symposium, in this new paradigm, post-fire management becomes the critical management point. In one discussion, somebody observed, "So what you're really trying to do is deconstruct the post-fire landscape and manage for better outcomes across the future landscape, across the entire fire landscape." So this is another way of looking at the current paradigm. Green management, then disturbance, then green management, while the post-fire teams are scrambling to do the work necessary to stabilize the fire footprint so that they can get back to green management. We then typically push or allow that fire footprint to recover back to its pre-fire state, though more and more frequently we get another fire. The alternative is that we manage existing post-fire landscapes or the imprints of the fires on the landscape during the transitional period, shown in white up here, with the ecosystem processes in mind. There is still an important role for green management where managers mitigate risk to fix assets and extract ecosystem services, but the emphasis changes to post-fire management, utilizing the fire footprint, stabilizing it, addressing fuel accumulations, revegetation needs, opportunities for habitat, etc. All the while, fire management is now a tool to modify fire behavior for resource benefit after protecting for life and property. From the second diagram, it should be obvious to many in the room that this new paradigm promotes an organization to manage with and for variability, one of the hallmarks of any resilient system, of which both landscapes and organizations benefit. In the long term, this new model, this new paradigm simplifies to a model that is very similar to the current paradigm, except now post-fire landscapes are being managed before and after fires with an eye towards fire being a part of them. Green management addresses risk reduction for fixed assets and ecosystem services, but with the outcomes being oriented towards landscapes with fire as a part of them. In effect, the old green management becomes synonymous with post-fire management because post-fire landscapes are recognized as the new pre-fire landscapes. Meanwhile, fire management remains responsible for protecting life, property, and managing the process of fire for desired ecological and social outcomes. The managers in this room are in the business of taking broad knowledge mostly about ecology and applying it to the ground. We do this by taking as much relevant information that you all here generate and defining a risk envelope for a decision maker to choose an action that is both socially acceptable and ecologically useful. However, in this room, most folks are contributing to the overarching body of knowledge surrounding sociology and ecology. The ability to shuffle information from the broader body of knowledge to the manager for developing these envelopes is critical, and that is why we are here in front of you today. I presented a lightning talk to you that basically says land managers recognize that there is a need to change. Our old management paradigm needs to shift. Only one person on this panel up here, Barb, has had any real exposure to this conversation as it began to develop early on. Yet every one of them instantly related to this conversation within a 15 or 20-minute introduction with one another. In the next 45 minutes or so, I've asked them to share their perspectives on where we have been and where we need to go. During this discussion, you might hear mention of place, which shouldn't just be heard as location. Rather, each of us has intimate knowledge of geographic place, social place, ecological place, cultural place, and organizational place. This idea of place is a key element in understanding and applying science. It helps us to reduce risk envelopes, to apply science and be better managers, in turn making more effective decisions and by definition making change. I am hopeful that some in this room today will benefit from exploring the new regions in this very, very preliminary diagram that I've included up here of this new paradigm. And from this panel discussion, which is really a fishbowl conversation of which we will invite participation from the audience as best as possible, it's a conversation amongst journeyman practitioners. We hope that you will gain some takeaways on where research, monitoring, and the places that you occupy might help all of us become better land stewards. So that's kind of the setup. We've been having conversations about this paradigm shift, and I invited this group of folks to come up and provide their perspectives. We're intentionally staying away from exactly what that paradigm shift looks like. I want to provide you the opportunity to hear that the principles or the values and the experiences that these folks have had, and likewise, we're interested in hearing from you now or in the future about what that looks like. So with that, when we first did this, it was going to be just a fishbowl conversation, but as we got here and realized that there was opportunities to actually interact with folks, the folks online and in the room, feel free to sign into Menti and using the QR code and enter the code up there. You can ask a question, and Alex will be monitoring that. And as we go through, we'll do some opening remarks, and we'll kind of keep that conversation going as questions come in. If you have them, feel free to do it online. For those of us in the room, please step up to a microphone, and we will try and accommodate the questions that we can as this develops. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew, but first just want to point out that up here at the top is that Menti connection information, so those of you online have an opportunity to participate. And with that, I'd like to introduce Andrew Puerini. and I'll let you start.
Thank you, James, for organizing this discussion. I'm looking forward to continuing it, and thank you, all the presenters here, for all the information and data that you've presented. It's been incredibly interesting, and I appreciate each and every one of you. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about traditional ecological fire knowledge. My name's Andrew Puerini. I'm the Fire Management and Protection Manager at the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. And I started my career here at Oregon State studying forestry and science. I also drafted myself a script. I wrote it myself. One specific memory I hold on to was a quote from a professor here in this room today, go Beefs, talking about how, quote, my cohort would be the manager of impending megafires. Looking up to a person that tucked their pants into their socks when he went to the woods was tough, but I agreed, and I did look up to him. It seemed obvious, facing more than a century of fuel accumulation from wildfire suppression and climate models predicting hotter, drier, and more erratic weather patterns, that we would start to see more megafires, and it turns out he was right. I'm gonna tell you guys some stories about myself, and it's gonna veer away significantly from science and data, and I hope you enjoy them. I worked on a fire crew during the summer between terms and was dispatched to many wildfires, most of them here in the Pacific Northwest. One of my most memorable megafires I was dispatched to was the Igley Complex west of Burns, Oregon. We were helpless in our efforts to slow the fire and effectively ran away from the flaming front during the heat of each day. I remember watching fire and dust whirls climb hundreds of feet above the mature forest canopy. It was exciting, invigorating, but heartbreaking. Throughout my career, there have been wildfires and prescribed fires I dispatched to that were perfectly managed, but also those that left me wondering if there might have been a better answer. As I became a forester and now a silviculturist, I often analyze fire management regimes and ask myself how to better protect, preserve, and even utilize the natural resources that we all care about. Working for the tribe, I often think about the numerous stories I've read and been told about how tribal ancestors managed the land well before European settlement, and how the use of fire for food management, primarily, is regularly the focus of those stories. Fire supplied game with supple browse, drove animals for hunting and harvesting meat, made gathering grasshoppers and tarweed easy, assisted fire-dependent plants such as bulbs and berries, helped cultivate species for basketry and tobacco use, was used to cook food sometimes in underground ovens, and most importantly, and I think what we're talking about here today, is thin the understory of dense vegetation and limited high-severity wildfire. I think back to yesterday, numerous similar slides of more recent wildfires where it exhibits low, moderate, and high-severity wildfire, and I think through the use of good fire, we can balance that graph better than we've done in the past, and taking those examples and learning from them, I think there's an opportunity to implement the tribal ecological knowledge that we have through history in order to balance that graph out a little bit. Back to my script. Fires were typically lit after harvest, in late fall, as a form of low severity post-use cleanup with ecological benefits to show the following season. I personally envision fire practitioners on carefully constructed and placed foot trails with hunting implements at the ready, lighting camas beds, huckleberry fields, oak savanna and groves, and even upland forest ridges to implement backing fires to thin young understory trees and brush, and to protect the large mature conifer trees above. I also envisioned families back home waiting to hear stories of harvest and fire and to manage the freshly burnt and supple land that would produce food for the following years. I have a quote to read from the book Indians, Fire, and the Land in the Pacific Northwest, authored by anthropologist Robert Boyd, who writes, The beneficial effect of understory and spot burning in several forest types is a preventative to wildfire, disease outbreak, and extensive forest burns, now so apparent to Northwest forest managers, have become timely because of ill-advised, unnatural practice of fire suppression. Likewise, Native Americans may not have understood contemporary ecologists' concept of edge environments, but the effect of creating more ecological borders through selective burning were the same, to increase the number and variety of species in any given area. Native Americans also were not concerned with species depletion and loss and overall biodiversity. These are problems of our own practice and times. So I came here today to express the importance of traditional ecological fire knowledge and to point out its effective use throughout the paradigm that James had mentioned, starting from green management all the way through post-fire management. And pre-settlement forest composition and historical anthropogenic prescribed burning regimes to maintain and protect forests are arguably the most important bits of natural history forest managers and researchers have at their disposal today. With lessons learned from the past, tribal land stewards, coupled with modern technology and science, the planning and use of fire fits well into all levels of forest management. Stepping away from reactive management and transitioning into proactive management is a necessary step at maintaining our natural resources for future generations. That's what I had prepared for today. Send it back to James.
Thank you, Andrew. And we're going to kind of work through these opening comments, but conversation will develop. But we just want to give folks an opportunity to share their experience right off the bat with you. So next up is Rebecca Lloyd from Montana.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for sharing your story. That was really powerful. Appreciate that. So I feel really lucky to be on this panel, maybe just kind of in the right place at the right time. And one thing that has really hit home with me that James also mentioned is it's fascinating to me how we've had very different backgrounds, the four of us on this panel, and very different career experiences and expertise, but we are all kind of converging on the same idea of this paradigm shift in management and this idea that collaborative management should be a part of that and may be the critical piece for bringing it about. So my experience on the panel has given me a chance to reflect on my career, such that it is. And I realized that since the very beginning of my career, I've worked on these novel collaborative relationships without any kind of intention. It's been a part of every job that I've done. And maybe none more significantly than the very early part of my career, the first decade of my career, working with the Nez Perce tribe, Department of Fisheries. And I'll share a little story about that. Like many of you, I started my career in natural resources as a seasonal. And when I was finishing my master's, I was a seasonal on the Nez Perce National Forest, which is in north central Idaho. It has some very similar landscapes to the Cascades in places, which is where I worked. And it was also at a time that the Nez Perce Clearwater was engaged fully in a flood recovery. A massive rain on snow event had occurred during the winters, and it was a Pacific Northwest wide event. The scale of the damage was such that we had seasonal crews like myself just working on sediment mitigation from different areas of road failure, for example. And the Nez Perce tribe at the time had a very young Department of Fisheries, and they had put together seasonal crews, and we worked alongside each other together without much distinction in who worked for who, doing the same kind of sediment, I would call it sediment mitigation at the time. When I finished my master's, I was ready to try to start my federal career, which was my plan. And the Nez Perce tribe's newly minted director of a watershed division, which is under the Department of Fisheries for the tribe, called me up and asked me if I would be willing to come work for the Nez Perce tribe and help him start basically a watershed restoration program that was treaty territory wide, so across several states, 7 national forests. And I wasn't going to turn that down. It was an incredible opportunity and very generous of them to offer. And when the Nez Perce tribe approached the Forest Service with this idea of a partnership, they came into it with a very clear vision. Their vision was one of co-management, which is something that the Forest Service is careful to use the terms collaborative management. It's a subtle difference. And they also came in with a clear vision of moving from a sediment mitigation program into a watershed restoration program. Effectively, they were bringing their cultural paradigm of the connectedness of watersheds into this idea of restoring what had been forests that had been in places badly damaged by the legacies of past logging practices. And with that simple paradigm shift, the program became a partnership, and it's truly a partnership at that time between the forest and the tribe, and it changed everything. We went from a kind of point source sediment program, almost analogous to what James was talking about with fire, into a landscape scale watershed restoration partnership focused on ridgetop to ridgetop. And this was years before the restoration ecology literature really started to focus on restoring ecology, ecological functions and processes as a way to bring about change. That partnership also fostered a shared learning. We developed a systematic monitoring program. We monitored everything that we did as new so that we could learn from our mistakes. We had a long-term trend monitoring, as well as learn from our successes, and it completely transformed how we approached our restoration to making it, I think, some of the work that I'm most proud of that I've ever done in my career, and I'm fortunate enough that I can go back and still see the results 20 years later, which is hard to believe. So as it transformed the restoration approach on the forest, at least the watershed restoration approach, it kind of gave me a sense of what could be, but it also gave me a sense of what should be, being a part of that relationship between the tribe and the Forest Service. And I've tried to bring that ethic and that sense into every job I've had since. I've worked for a conservation organization, running a collaborative management program between Canada and the US, and I am now a Forest Service employee and have been for the last 6 years and still closely affiliated with the Nez Perce tribe programs. And so some kind of looking back, the partnership looks different now. It certainly had some challenges, and it's given me some lessons learned about what makes a sustainable collaborative management partnership, and we can talk about those lessons learned if you're interested. And also it's also given me some lessons learned about how to bring science into programs like that, and we can also talk about those if you have interest later, or you can even buttonhole me later. So thank you.
Thanks, Becca. Next up is Dustin.
Hey, good morning, Good morning, everybody. Thankful to be here, be in the company of so many people. They're invested in researching and understanding post-fire landscapes and coming together to discuss the future of land and resource management in this region. So I'm here. The question was how does a new landscape and resource management paradigm emerge? I mean, I can offer a few thoughts that I've had from discussions, particularly with my team back in Grand Round in our historic preservation office, and along with others in Indian country, and talk about kind of the intersection of tribes' interest and wildfires and kind of land management more broadly. And a lot of these discussions began during and since the 2021 fire season, as I was out on fire and communicating with the folks I work with back home, which is a team of archaeologists within the Cultural Resource Department, and just kind of noticing, just bring up a lot of it brought up a lot of questions that I had, and we were kind of bouncing back and forth. And what we're thinking is perhaps, I don't want to say some like sort of blind spots, but things to consider, kind of questions. And I feel that I'm always in kind of odd company. I'm the one that studied philosophy, so I don't bring normally data and have the answers. Normally I bring uncomfortable questions to the table and leave them unanswered for other people to figure out. So that's kind of where we're at today. But I hope that I can bring a few things to the table that can perhaps be discussed further. One of the most important things, kind of perspective, especially within cultural resources and with tribes in a relationship to what's been going on in the landscape, is communication. And one of the things is being notified and consulted when incidences are happening, like within your jurisdictions. And this has been something that has been it's rather difficult, say, for a tribe to express what its values at risk are, and to be like into the conversation if they're not part of the conversation in the first place. And in talking about sort of like paradigm shifts, one of the things I think about is like, who are the people in the room that are having the discussions and like in making the decisions. So, one of the questions, how can tribes, as stakeholders and also as like historical and contemporary stewards of these lands and resources, communicate their values at risk? These values at risk, they can't be incorporated into mid and long-term management plans or into emergency incident action plans during wildfire instances unless those lines of communication are open. And I think it's important to say this again. Although it really does seem basic, that tribal perspectives, can't be included if there's not communication with tribes regarding like values at risk. And there's a little bit of a caveat here. I say with tribes and particularly our tribe. Andrew and myself, work for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. However, with these sort of discussions and these sort of consultations that we're asking for is kind of the recognition as one, that there's not just one tribe, that perhaps, will be many, depending on what your jurisdiction is. It is something that needs to be consulted with, regarding what those values at risk are on that landscape. And additionally, within each tribe itself is going to be multiple departments and multiple programs that are going to be different. When engaging in that sort of consultation and discussion with those tribes, is being aware of like what the organizational structure is of those tribes in order so that you're communicating to the right people. I think a perfect example, again, of both Andrew and I both working for the same tribe, we both work in different departments. And like when consultation is coming to the tribe, it is coming to two different departments that have two different it's the same tribe, but different concerns regarding different values, whether it's natural, and then within our case, cultural resources, although it could be argued that are the same thing as, I think, what Andrew had just talked about within his talk. So continuing on with like kind of the consultation, one of the things that we noticed is like on incident itself is, one of the questions that I often have is like, have the tribes been contacted, or what are the threshold for the tribes to be contacted regarding that incident that happens? I perhaps may be a little bit more, maybe bullish on this, but I would think that just about any time there is a sort of wildfire incident, anything that has a P code, and I'm sure most of us know what that is, that there's some sort of contact that is going to be made with the tribe regarding what has happened, and if there's any sort of input that can be that they can have regarding that incident and how that's going to potentially be managed. And also, while the incident command team and the resource advisors attached to the incident will have access to sensitive archaeological information, perhaps to inform their decisions, they don't have like all the information. local tribes retain a lot of sensitive cultural knowledge about place and perhaps where things are at, and relying perhaps on resource advisors that are using standard databases like from SHPO or whatnot is not going to be sufficient information in order to properly protect the resources that are at risk. So, let's see. Sorry here. So, like, including tribes, and it's determined resource priorities and values at risk, I get, is one of the most significant, like, basic, messages that, that I could put out here, because there's not much of a conversation that is to be had if, like, that is not being done. So, as, like, I talk to, as I'm on this panel and speak with everyone else here, is like the question I would want to leave you with is that when we have these sort of instances that are happening on your landscape, like, have you contacted the tribes? And have you asked for what their input is on how that can be managed? So that we can have a better collaborative effort to actually be, take care of the particular incident in place, but also begin to have collaboration to be proactive in the future, which I think a lot about with this panel and what we're talking about is how can we begin to be more proactive and not reactive in our management, especially when it comes to wildfires. Oh.
Great, thank you, Dustin. I think one of the key pieces we'll probably build on a little bit here is that communication component of how do you change a paradigm, right? It starts with communication. But in addition, it's having the relationships ahead of time and developing those relationships. And just to bring some of that back into context here, right? We're all looking to do better land management or understand the ecology better. And there's a lot of untapped information resources out there for us. But it's about developing those relationships and having the conversations ahead of time and moving through that process. And we'll hopefully come back to that a little bit more. And with that, I'm going to move on to Barb Garcia and let you take it away.
All right, thanks a lot. It's really great to be back in the Pacific Northwest. I'm hoping I can tie in with some of you and give you hugs, because I haven't seen some of you since before COVID, and to be able to touch you and see you in person is a real treat for me. Super grateful to be asked to be a part of this panel, and really honored to be sitting up here with these folks here that have humbled me and give me faith and motivation in where we could potentially go into the future. So I want to go back to the objectives identified for this symposium. I mean, why did we all say we're going to take a week out of our schedules that we're all pretty swamped? Like, why here, why now? Why was this so important? So I went back and I took a look at what the goals were. And just to remind everyone, there are 3 goals. To provide an opportunity for scientists and managers to share what they are learning or hoping to learn from recent fires. To provide an opportunity for practitioners, policymakers, and deciding officials to begin, and I would add continue and amplify, discussions on how new discoveries can inform future decisions. And finally, to promote collaboration between institutions and agencies involved in fire research and monitoring. Now, James set the stage for us this morning with a really nice title here, The Next Pre-Fire Landscape, How Does a New Landscape Management Paradigm Emerge? He mentioned phrases like cultural paradigm shift, and fire as a process. He offered a definition for a paradigm shift as a fundamental change in approach or underlying assumptions. So when I think of fire as a process, given my background as a wildlife ecologist, I go straight to biological and physical processes. But what we're talking about in this panel today is truly a social aspect and cultural change in how we manage fire on the landscape. James presented what he called, 3, I think he said generic phrases, how we kind of view fire right now. And that is the green ecological phase, the fire management or suppression phase, and the post-fire management side, the end of that workflow. As you've heard today, there are many success stories, many experiences. I'm sure you guys have your own out there that you could share, and it would be wonderful to have time to hear those. I'm definitely carrying my own badges of valor, as well as my own scars of challenges and lessons learned over all the years doing fire. Today, I want to spend some time talking about how do we take smaller scale successes and tactics to a bigger stage. There's a lot of wonderful work happening on districts, on forests, on private land, but given where we're at in terms of fire and climate crisis here, how do we amplify that and get it to the bigger scale? I'm hoping that we can motivate each other to have stronger ties with our researchers, you folks out there, our practitioners, and our deciding officials. I'm hoping that we can have a language that we all speak that in turn can be applied in an operational and meaningful way. We all know that there's a social construct in terms of how line officers make decisions on the ground, and policymakers as well, but research has to be the grounding of that. If we don't have a language that we can understand between all of us, we are failing in every aspect of our profession. I'm at the point of my career where I want to take what this young professional behind me learned over 24 years ago. That was my very first fire 24 years ago on the Idaho Panhandle. I'd like to apply that to the big scale, and I think this is a good start, people in this room. I think we need the right scientific and knowledge and research, practical experience, like some of the folks up here, and a prioritization to actually do it. Some of this may be uncomfortable, because growth always is, and I'm okay with discomfort, but I don't want to be punished either. So there's a balance in how we move this forward. Being bold and not discounting things like the ESA and other law and regulation that were created for very good reasons. But it does mean asking the right questions and being brave enough to change something when it is broken. Trust is a crucial piece of this, and to me that means knowledge, courage, accountability, and follow-through. So lastly, I want to share one of my experiences that is not a Pacific Northwest experience. This is during my time in Region 3 of the Forest Service, so that is, it was in Arizona on the Coconino National Forest. And this was a time of real growth for me. At that point in time, I was largely a fire wildlife ecologist. I did mostly fire all the time. So I think back to a night where a group of us were huddled up around an engine and doing an in-briefing, and everyone was extremely uncomfortable. You could feel it around everyone. And we were getting ready to put prescribed fire in a protected activity center, or PAC, for Mexican spotted owl, who had successfully fledged young that very year. It was very close to the core. The fire was a natural ignition, and we knew that if we had done heavy suppression activity, we probably wouldn't be able to catch it anyway, and there would be an enormous amount of damage to the ground that we would have a really hard time remedying after the fact. So thankfully, we had been strategizing with the Fish and Wildlife Service about how do we be more proactive during the green ecological stage to have better outcomes for listed species at the end. So we pulled it together and decided we're going to put fire on the ground in as best terms as we possibly can. That entire night, the engine captains and the 2 hotshot crews that helped us lead this effort kept checking in on me because I was either on the verge of fainting or throwing up at any given time, given what was happening. So skip ahead about 3 days when I was safe enough to go back in. We had, thankfully, a couple of long-term FIA plots within these 5 drainages, and the one in particular happened to be located very close to the core nest area for Mexican spotted owls. So we went in and we decided to remeasure those plots in addition to putting additional plots in using FIA protocol. And the reason I'm bringing that up is, again, this is where research and practitioners come together in a really meaningful way. The bottom line is, after we took those plots, the heterogeneity within not just that protected activities center, but 5 other drainages was beyond what we could have imagined. That fire burned the way that we had hoped that it would burn, a mosaic of nice patchiness, but the integrity of the core and the protected activity center itself remained intact. The next year, when we monitored the owl activity within that protected activity center, we noticed that that female had fledged three triplets. The next year, another 3. The next year, another 3. So I'm bringing this up again because it was really a success in the terms of how research practitioners and our partners all came together, and it really required a lot of trust on our part. And again, it was in a very uncomfortable, risky situation that we weren't sure what the outcome was. I also want to bring up the fact that in retrospect, we talked about what would have been our workflow had we not taken those tactics. We could have easily sat back and let fire go in and do what they do, put that fire out, do it at any cost so that it doesn't get any bigger. And we would have been, probably I would have been dealing with over the next 2 years after that, pretty intense monitoring, mitigation, and probably a lot of conversation back and forth with the Fish and Wildlife Service about what we didn't do right. And that would have been 2 years of my time, as well as fire, as well as the line officers going to these meetings to negotiate that space. 2 years that we could have been putting into a green ecological program down the way that positions us even better. So I'm hopeful today as we work together and we present these experiences to you that we can take this to the next level. I mean, I feel right now we don't have any time to spare. Like, now's the time. If we're going to make this happen, we need to make it happen. So these guys tease me because I'm always talking about being bold and being brave, and again, that requires some discomfort, I think, in order to grow. But I would argue that if we continue to do business in a very siloed management way, we only work in this box for this period of time, and we don't think about the next box down the way, we are missing the mark as professionals in natural resources, and we are not managing these landscapes for the communities that value them, and I would argue that we are not representing our resources the way that we need to. I can think of no better group than our researchers to help us get there. I can think of no better group, hopefully, of the people that are joining us virtually. There's some practitioners and deciding officials out there. I see a few that I recognize. But at the end, I'm hoping that we can be bold and we can really think about this cultural paradigm shift in a bigger way than just at local levels. And I'm hoping you guys have some questions, comments, and we can engage in some dialogue now.
Thanks to everybody. Thank you, Barb, for bringing that final perspective to it. I'm going to pause 1 second and just give you guys an opportunity if you had any follow-ups based on what you heard from each other, but we do have some questions that we can ask otherwise. All right. Yeah, I think all of us were preferred to be able to interact with the audience, but so the question that we received on Minty was, is anyone at the tribe working with state and federal agencies to implement tribal ecological knowledge to utilize prescribed fire to decrease fire severity? If not, where should we start?
I'll take the question. Yeah. The answer in a nutshell is yes, we do collaborate with our partners in implementation of tribal ecological fire knowledge and use. I think there's certainly opportunity to expand and specifically into the realm of research and science. We do not have partnerships on that end. It's mostly implementation partnerships. I hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you. Does anybody want to add to that from your perspectives?
That covers it.
Okay. One of the things that's come up in our conversations has been that, you know, in general, there has to be a shift of these management paradigms to better incorporate some of these relationships and to become more aligned at a broader landscape, right? Regardless of ownership. And we talk about that. We talk about all hands, all lands in various agencies. But I think it's critical that we have to recognize that all hands and all lands means different things to different people, and those priorities shift. And I think that, again, right, the challenge is how do you prompt that paradigm shift? Oop. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, good morning. Appreciate the presentation, and I really appreciate the kind of crosswalk between management and kind of ecologists, right? And so my question is more on the management side, because I saw an opening when somebody mentioned P code. So my question is, to what extent do our standard business operations, such as the P code or an H code for bear, or the flow of annual recovery dollars or targets, our standard agency business operations, how do those maybe hinder our intent to shift the paradigm into a more integrated idea of fire management, post-fire management, really the shift from that green fire, post-fire scenario to one that's more integrated? What are we doing now, and what can we do to kind of influence those business operations?
Yeah, I guess I was the one that mentioned the P code, and I bring
Could you
that
tell
up
us what a
because
P
that's
code
a
means for those of us who have no idea?
It's a financial code for a fire.
a financial code for a fire, which I guess would be different with state and federal, but at least with like federal agencies, I see that as a federal undertaking, and and something like that is normally that you would be consulting with a tribe regarding. So what could be different of a different integration? And I think I might have missed it in my comments, but I think it's just beginning to have a more participation, especially at these sort of instances that that was bringing up. And I think a really good example is, the resource advisors that I was bringing up. And I know I'm saying this, and this is a capacity issue, and I'm sure everyone here, there's not enough money and there's not enough people. We all feel that. But if it's not asked for, then perhaps it's not going to be considered for the future to begin to develop. And I think that's one of an important step towards an integration is beginning to have more, or at least be asking for, let's say, cultural or tribal resource advisors on their lands when there's a fire. I mean, I think it's it's just kind of very basic. I would think that you would want somebody whose lands it is, that they will be able to provide a perspective of what they have, what their values at risk are, and have a communication back with their government in order to bring that into whatever the incident management team that is there, or or the district that's there, or whatnot. And I think that's that could be a step towards that sort of integration. And I think that fits in with the idea of the paradigm shift is we have people with different perspectives and what their values are brought to the table. Then we're going to have to shift what our actions are. And I think that's just one of a few ways that it could assist in that shift.
So that's an interesting question. I have a lot of challenges with the P code and what we do after, as well as the H code, but I will speak to my experience as a resource advisor on fires, and trying to bring in the expertise of the tribes that I knew, because I had the relationships that James was talking about, and hitting complete walls. So there was no mechanism when I wanted to bring in expertise to talk about hydrology and fisheries. The incident management team sent me, we do that through the archaeologist. I'm like, well, that's not what I'm talking about. These are cultural resources, but we're not doing point protection. I want to bring in the local expertise about these streams. And it was, I was a little mystified and frustrated because what it seemed so obvious to me because of how I started my career, there was no mechanism to bring that in during the fire. And I think just like what Dustin was saying, that needs to start before the fires ever hit the ground. Those kinds of relationships need to be built, and we need to, as Forest Service managers, stop siloing our thinking about what those relationships entail, like siloing this to just archaeology or just this is what we mean, but really make an attempt to think larger about how we can build those relationships. And then when the incidents do arrive, then those relationships are already in place. And then, my idea, and this is probably naive, is that the mechanisms, the agreements that will follow once the relationships are there, if we just work hard enough and don't give up, we'll find a way to bring, that experience into the teams.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name's Angela White, and I'm actually with the Pacific Southwest Research Station. And I just want to start by saying thank you. You all spoke to my heart in different ways, and I hope you spoke to the heart of this group here today. And the second thing I wanted to ask is, can I take you all out to lunch? Because I think you're bringing up such an important topic that really frustrates me in my field. So I'm a research ecologist, and I definitely think we need a paradigm shift in a lot of the ways that you're talking about today. And I'm wondering, as a researcher, I think that we need to kind of have a different paradigm shift in research. So we're talking about management paradigm shifts, but I think, and some of you spoke to this, like, what can we do as research to be more engaged in that conversation? So we're really doing studies that are co-evolving with each other so that we can learn as we go. I find myself in a lot of these talks thinking about the data we learn, what we're learning, and how that actually is helping address some of the uncertainties you face on the ground with what you want to manage. So I'm wondering if you see, I guess I see a need not only for a paradigm shift within management and how we address our partners, but even just that how researchers engage with those communities, both tribes or local managers, or even just, society in general. Like, is there a need for a paradigm shift in how researchers engage in this conversation?
Thank you for stepping up to the mic and providing that, and thanks for the pat on the back. We appreciate it. It's not always a glorious job, but we appreciate from our researchers that acknowledgement. I do think that there is room for a paradigm shift within research. And, prior to the position I hold now, I was the regional wildlife ecologist for the Forest Service here in the Pacific Northwest. And one of the most fruitful parts of that job that I miss terribly is the engagement that I had with the research community in terms of what is the knowledge that's being gained, what are the questions that we need to have answered, are we asking the right questions, and then are our data sets actually geared towards long-term maintenance and being able to answer those questions. Data for sake of data, it's not really getting us anywhere. So how do we work together, and then how do we communicate that information in a way that's digestible and we can operationalize it? So that bridge between the two is definitely room for improvement. I wouldn't say that there are pockets of real success that are happening out there. I mean, there's several researchers I saw on the agenda that are doing just that. And so kudos to them. And if we can, for lack, pardon the pun, let that spread like wildfire, then we're going to be sitting in a much better place in terms of our knowledge and feeling more anchored when we're making decisions as we continue to move forward, and hopefully will be, that key ignition source to moving us into that paradigm faster.
Anyone else from the panel want to respond? We move on.
Yeah, if there's time.
Okay. We're going to take a question from our virtual participants. How do you see management shifts corresponding with climate shifts? Is historic knowledge useful for future planning in climates that no human has experienced?
Who wants to take that one? Andrew, do you want to go ahead? Have some time on the mic.
So again, I think the simple answer is yes, historical use of fire can be implemented in the face of a changing climate. I think, in fact, there could be additional opportunities to explore, and having a good scientific basis and some palatable information to work off of certainly is useful. I think of technology and our weather resources, and historically there was no weather forecast. So we can take advantage of specific environmental knowledge to implement good fire on the landscape, similar to how it was implemented thousands of years ago. Doesn't completely answer the question if somebody else wants to go.
Anyone else from the panel?
That's a good question.
Yeah?
It is.
It's a
It's
tough
sort of the
question.
elephant in the room, right? The whole HRV, FRV conversation. And I think that this is where I think we need to allow ourselves some grace, that there's an urgency out there for sure, what we're seeing in terms of these beloved places and critters within. But we also need to be calculated and give ourselves grace to learn. I think certainly historical perspectives give us an anchor point, something to maybe guide us. But we are in a changing world, and I think it would be foolish for us to just completely rely only on those data sets in order to manage into the future. But what does that look like? I guess I would ask that question to the room. Hopefully, those are part of our dialogue, and how we'll work together is where is that sweet spot? How do we incorporate what we don't know yet, given how fast everything is changing?
Next, we'll go to the room.
Hi. Echoing the thanks to the panel, some wonderful ideas and good catalyst for future discussions. As I was listening to pieces and potentially riffing off this idea of increased engagement with researchers and changing the way we work, I'm going to take off my researcher hat and put on my educator hat, and thinking as a faculty member here at OSU, gosh, what can we do in terms of the pipeline of folks coming in, how we teach, how we train, how we learn and mentor, to catalyze even further this long-term investment of changing the paradigm. So it's kind of an observation, but I guess also a question. If anything comes to mind, how we, in the education of students, OSU more broadly, as faculty members and instructors, where you might see opportunities. I see a lot, but to engage and to change the way conversations play out from that earlier stage. So that's all.
Thank you. I don't want to dominate the mic, but you just got me super excited. I can see 50 million different ways to have success there. In the northern region, we are engaging in very similar conversations with the University of Montana, Montana State, North Dakota State, and University of Idaho, trying to figure out how do we help students as they move through to become professional natural resource specialists or researchers, wherever path they go. How do we bridge that gap from the onset and help communicate, this is the real world. These are things in books and you're going to learn and they're important. You need to have that technical background. But when I got my master's thesis and I got my first job at the Forest Service, boy, it was a rude awakening for me. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I had wished that I had a little bit more of that anchoring within my graduate program as well as in my undergrad to be a little bit better positioned to move the mark quicker than I was able to do.
I guess I can add one thing, and I don't think this will be controversial within this audience of discussing that we need to put, in many ecosystems, put fire, back in it, right? I don't think that's controversial here. However, stepping outside this room and talking to the general public, perhaps that may be, and we got quite the we got the work cut out for us in order to do that, to convince the regular person out there that we want to burn this land that's next to where they live, and that we want to do this on a regular basis. And so when I think of kind of like the educational like aspect is like, what can we be doing to not just be talking amongst ourselves about doing these things, but how can we be talking to our neighbors or the other people out there that are not exposed to this sort of research? And that's perhaps going to be ultimately one of the big like pieces of red tape that like holds back, let's say, something like putting more fire down on the ground. And I don't have an answer to that. And I know that there seems to be some headway since, I first got into fire between, talk about prescribed fire, 10 years ago and where we are now. It seems like perhaps it's more acceptable, more people are talking about it, but there's still a lot more work to do, especially considering how much more fire needs to be put down. I can't remember what the number was, but I think we were discussing something like a few million acres a year needs to be burned just to maintain like the natural state of things. That's a lot of people convinced, and that's also a lot of people to hire. So, yeah.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question from our online participants before lunch. Do you anticipate any pushback from the public or non-land management stakeholders towards incorporating fire as a management tool and constant landscape feature?
You just kind of mentioned that.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Of course, but.
Yeah. I think the answer is certainly yes, and the follow-up is to continue education. Educating public, educating students, and putting it in terms that are palatable to the public as well. It's a difficult task that is, and we're basically, like James was saying, it's an obligatory task, and it's important that we communicate the science and the management level implications of the actions that we're proposing. I'll also jump back to the question about climate change. I think I did say my answer was yes, I see opportunity moving forward to continue implementing fire as a tool in the face of climate change, and I'll elaborate on that and say that I think it's crucial that we continue to implement fire on the landscape in the face of climate change in order to mitigate the effects. And I'll talk again about the slide that we looked at yesterday several times, which was the low, moderate, and high severity kind of breakout of recent fires. And through using fire, I think there's opportunity to balance that to bring balance to that graph in the future. And I think it's necessary in the face of a changing climate.
All right, and with that, I do want to just add one piece to that climate change question in terms of, or not climate change, sorry, the social pushback. I think that's where everybody in this room collectively is a massive and important piece of the puzzle, right? As managers, we take the science and the knowledge and the experience, and we make those decisions for social and ecological reasons. You guys provide that information, you guys being researchers and researchers. The key here is that, right, it's those social envelopes that are both constraining and empowering. And understanding how to communicate that science not only to me as a professional who does nothing but read science and apply it, but then applying that through, to the public in digestible ways that shape that conversation and allow us to move forward is a critical part of that. And that's, that diagram I put up there, I was dumbfounded rather, at what it says in that diagram to me, which is, it's not just the ecology, it's not just the management, it's the social envelopes, it's the world that we live in. And to make that paradigm shift, it takes all of us to make it happen. So with that, thank you very much for staying the last 10 minutes. We wanted this to be a very useful conversation. I am more than satisfied at how it turned out. I hope you are as well. I hope that you will exclude my presentation and focus and remember what these guys brought to you in the conversation. And some of us will be here at 6:30. Cheryl asked if some of us would be willing to continue a conversation. We will be here, at least a subset of us, for that presentation this evening. We will try and be here at 6:30 if you all, or any of you would like to have further conversation. And with that, please thank the panelists, and thank you.